And we are back for another episode of Pioneers, Builders, Jacksonville, Florida, or as we know now, PB and Jax for short. Today, special guest. I'm very happy that he's on. Had a chance to get to know him. I think the work he's doing is absolutely incredible. And so, Mr. Armstrong, thank you so much for being here, man. I'm just delighted to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Before we get started here, normally I wear like a Florida State hat, sometimes a Texas hat, but I think the moment calls for little grounds of grace.
Love it.
Yeah, man. So, Ron, you're the founder of Sponsored by Grace and then Grounds of Grace. And from my understanding, been about 4 or 5 years that we've been doing this in some capacity. Obviously, I'm very excited to share your story. There's a lot to share. But when we first met, there was a lot of groundwork that was laid to get to this moment. There's a lot of context that leads us to this foundership story. I know it's a story of faith. I know it wasn't always a faith-based story, but we got there. And so I want to start there. Can you walk through the origin story of how Sponsored by Grace and Grounds of Grace came to be?
Yeah. So I came to Jacksonville in 2010 on a drug addiction, was a full-blown alcoholic, had about $5 to my name, really didn't have anything, and got here and worked really hard. I was in the construction industry. A company gave me a shot here, and I did very well. Became one of the youngest superintendents to manage multi-million-dollar projects here in Jacksonville out at the Naval Station. And for a couple of years, just kind of status quo stuff. But it was around 2012, end of 2011, 2012, where my crane operator invited me to church. Never stepped foot into a church before. And when I experienced that invitation, it changed my life. I stepped into the church of Beach United in Jacksonville Beach, heard the gospel for the first time, and my life was radically changed. I believe I heard that it was my time now to give back. I've taken for so long in my life from so many people, did a lot of horrific things, seen a lot of horrific things, coming from my parents being alcoholics, drug addicts, being on the streets, drug trafficking, all the nine. And I just felt like the Lord was saying, hey, I'm going to use you now to give back. And so he did. He sent me to Cado, Brazil on a mission trip. And on that mission trip, I seen an organization called Compassion International doing some phenomenal things. And what they were doing was sponsoring kids domestically, internationally. It gave you an opportunity to sow into a child for $38 a month to feed a kid, to clothe a kid, make sure that the child had, a safe environment. And so when I went to see the child that I sponsored, his name was Ronald. It was the reality that this organization was doing some amazing things, sponsoring 1.4 million kids from a domestic level. So it was all fun. We got to meet and had a great time, and we came back here to the States. And fast forward 5 years later, I'm sitting on my couch with my wife, and we're watching Shark Tank, and I look over at our refrigerator, and there was my child, Ronaldo. And I just kind of thought for a minute, I said, man, this is crazy. Like a $1.4 billion nonprofit doing amazing work, sponsoring 1.6 million kids. And I'm one of those people that's sending $38 a month across the seas to help a child in poverty. And so I just look over to my wife and I said, what about local kids in local poverty? What are we doing for our local kids in our own backyard? And it was just the reality that I wanted to find out. And so my father-in-law was a retired chief of JSO, and my brother-in-law currently still works for the sheriff's office. And I went to them and I said, hey, where's the roughest part of Jacksonville from me not being here? And they said 32209, the murder capital. And I was like, man, what does that look like? That's, only 26 minutes away from my front doorstep. And so a couple of weeks go by and we got a phone call that a family actually needed some beds in the 32209 zip code. And it was just kind of like a perfect alignment. And so next thing you know, I was renting a U-Haul and had some beds donated from friends and family and was driving over to this apartment complex called Cleveland Arms, And we just drove in, and I tell people to this day, it was probably one of the most eerie, darkest feelings I have ever felt in my life driving into this apartment complex. And then the next thing you know, we're toting these beds upstairs to the second floor and knock on the door, and Mr. Thompson was there and still lives there today. And walk in and delivering beds. And then the minute the door opened was like the minute my life changed. I was seeing black mold hanging from the ceilings, roaches crawling everywhere. Kids had no clothes, no furniture. Kids were sleeping on the floor. And it almost gave me a reality check, and it kind of took me back to Brazil, the things that I saw in Brazil. And I said, this can't be this, inhumane living conditions only 26 minutes away from my front doorstep. And so I took the matters into my own hands and left that apartment complex with just a heart of becoming a servant. And so we landed in the old Cleveland Arm Apartments in 2018 just by bringing beds. And then that's kind of where the story started.
Yeah, what an amazing trip to get to where you are. The fact that it kind of dances into Brazil to come right back to Jacksonville is incredible, to say the least. And so obviously now you've seen it with your own eyes. You took the beds there, the door was opened, you saw everything that you needed to see, and then you realize we got to do something. There has to be a change of some sort. And so from there, like, where does the story go? If I recall correctly, I know that you continued to get into like delivering more furniture and working with the kids that were in the community. But what was, after you saw that and you realized, okay, I need to be a servant for this community, what was the next step for you in terms of for yourself making an impact?
Yeah, so it was really hard. The minute that I decided that I wanted to help, not fix this community, but just serve the community, the enemy just started to come at work. I started getting death threats. I started, getting cussed out, spit on, doors slammed in my face, because I made a commitment to myself. I'm going to come to this community. I'm just going to serve. I'm going to push kids on the playground. I'm going to try to give whatever I can, have conversation. But the reality was I didn't look like one of them. And so I was an outsider. Some portrayed me as, an enemy, undercover law enforcement, you name it, I got called it. And so, but I just knew if I stayed consistent, there would be a breakthrough, because a lot of times in communities like ours, the trust factor it's just not built. A lot of organizations don't take the time to stay consistent. We want, really quick, rapid fruit. And so it took me about 6 months to get past that. No one would shake my hand. People would look at me weird, like, what are you doing in our community? And so probably about 6.5 months later, it started to kind of break. And I started to notice like people were allowing me in their apartments, and people were saying hello, and I was getting handshakes and, hey, Mr. Ron. And then they started calling me Pastor Ron. And so then I just really noticed like, wow, like something's different is happening. And so, it gave me a lot of confidence. I was working a 40-hour, 50-hour week job, still corporate America, but I was showing up 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes in the night, sometimes on Saturdays, sometimes in the weekdays, getting there when the kids were off the bus, because I knew that this was my mission field. And so, 18, 19, and 20, that was the playbook of just being consistent. And so we started developing a little bit of, programmatic stuff. We really started to hone in on sponsorship and emergency assistance. And, at this time, we had a nonprofit, and we had probably $15,000 in the bank. And it's kind of like volunteers, show up when you want to. But I gained the credibility of the community. And so over the first 3 years, you could just see a shift that was happening in the community. Now, and the whole time, the craziest things were happening. I was seeing people getting killed right in front of me, shootings happening, inhumane living conditions, getting phone calls where I'd show up on scene. There's a dead body in the community because of the night. I mean, just wild stuff I never thought I would see before. And so then 2020 came, and we held our first church service across the street from the community. And everything could have went wrong in the playbook. It was pouring rain the day of. I got in an accident. I didn't know who was going to show up. But literally, we started setting up in the rain. And, probably 10 minutes before the church service started, I look up, and here comes just hundreds of people from the community walking across the street. And it was just that moment, like, I believe for the past 3 years, people actually trust me. Like when, hey, Pastor Ron's going to give a message today, let's go over and support him. Like the whole community came. And so we did a service in 2020, ended up baptizing about 33 people from the community, drug dealers, prostitutes, families, kids, people surrendering their life to Jesus. So the whole event was an absolute miracle. So fast forward, there was a business guy standing in the back who came from across town who heard about what we were doing. And the week later, he invited me to lunch. He said, "Hey man, can I just take you to lunch?" And I was like, "Yeah." And we went to lunch, and he said, "Man, I've never seen something like that before, and I've been a Christian a long time." And I was like, "Hey man, praise God, we're just there to serve." And he's like, "No man," he's like, "I believe you're supposed to be doing this full time." And I said, "Oh, okay." And at this point, I'm making, well over six figures. I'm in a VP at a company and doing really well. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to give you 15 grand to leave your job tomorrow, and I want you to do it." And that was just that moment where I took a huge leap of faith. Went in the next day, told my boss I'll put in my 6 weeks notice, and I took 15 grand and started to run with it.
There's a couple things you mentioned there that I want to double back on. So number one is, you just said that you had made your way to a VP title and you were clearing six figures a year. But 10 minutes ago when we started this story, you came to Jacksonville an addict and, not a lot of money. And so just the personal journey itself from where you were to where you ended up before you left to do this full time. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like how was that journey? If somebody else was going through something similar to you, is there anything you would say to them? Because even if you didn't go down this path of service to others, your personal journey itself is a success. So can you speak on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think what I came to grips on was I needed help for myself. And so I think a lot of times when people are stuck in addictions, we want to find out what the solution is. How do we quickly get out of it? But until you can come to the grasp of, hey, I need help, it's really just it's an end road. And so when I figured that I needed help, I started down this road of working on myself. And so one thing my dad, even in his active addiction stage, he always taught me to do was just to work hard. And that's what I did. I worked hard at whatever I did, even though I had an active addiction. But slowly, as I came away from those addictions and now being, 13 years sober, haven't touched a drink, haven't touched a drug. I know that that is a reality that someone else can live as well. But then just working hard, worked hard at everything I was presented, whether it was small jobs, big jobs. And I think when people realize like you're just a hard worker, you're willing to learn, you're willing to submit, that can take you a long way. And so, my last stop in the VP world was cleaning toilets. I was number two in charge of a really big company here in Jacksonville. And my job was to clean over 100 locations and had, 90 something staff underneath me. And, people are like, "You clean toilets for a living?" I was like, "Absolutely, every single one of them." But it gave me a gave me a great title. I learned how to submit underneath leadership, and it took me a long way. And so, a lot of people look for those shiny objects in life and how quick they can get up the ladder and what titles they can wear. But I just look back and, I was a glorified janitor.
Did you feel like you were finding purpose in the hard work? Maybe not the work itself, but in the fact that you had an outlet that you were able to give 100% to?
So yeah, I mean, anytime that you are responsible for people, I think there's purpose hidden in that so that you can, build and uplift and encourage people throughout your journey. That says everything about who you are. If you just go into a job, just wanting a job, wanting a paycheck, hitting the time clock, going home, there's no really purpose in that. Yeah, you're getting a paycheck to, fund the things that you really love to do. But if we can turn our, mindset towards whatever job you're in, as long as you can utilize it to, make it about somebody else, that's where you find your purpose.
I'm glad you said that because that segues me to the other question I had, which is when you had the service and it was raining and everything was going wrong, but you still had a ton of people show up and you got to baptize a lot of people and give them a chance at a rebirth, if you will. I want to know how that felt to you personally when you see that kind of turnout. You see these kind of people showing up for you. You were spit on. You were looked at different. You were rejected by that community just a few months prior, and now people are looking to you, looking for you, anticipating your word, listening to your preachings, and then now making a decision to give their life to the Lord. I want to know, like, personally how that felt.
Yeah, anytime I tell a story, I get choked up because I'll never forget when I had people come up and they were just like, "Man, thanks for not giving up on us." And when people say that, it means a lot because I know how it has felt when people give up on you. And It's not easy. You got to keep going, no matter what happens. And when you look at an adult in the face and they have said, man, no one has ever stayed as long as you have, no one has ever, given us such hope. Man, that's what gets me up in the morning, is knowing that there are people in our city, in our communities, that have just been given up on, that are voiceless, that, are not having a fighting chance. And if, I can do what I really feel like I've been called to do, that just has shown me that there's true purpose, and it's not about me. I've lived so much in my life where everything had to be about me. And now I get to live a life where everything is about someone else.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that at that event and the emotions you felt made it easy to accept that offer for 15 grand to walk away from your job? Was that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I call it a gut feeling, but sometimes that's how it works. Okay. So we decided to quit. We've put in our 6-week notice. We've done the turnover. We've accepted the money. And from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the first thing was sponsored by Grace, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Um, After we accepted the money and now we've decided to embark on this journey of sponsored by Grace and helping others, what did that look like from the early days of you now being unemployed and becoming a full-time nonprofit pursuer, if you will?
Yeah, so I think it's like anything else. You put your feet on the ground, you start running. When you're passionate and you're in a position where I believe that I was called to do this, you just start working hard. And so, 2020, 2021 starts coming around. We're in COVID. We're coming out of COVID. We really don't know what's going on. We've been shut out from our community. All nonprofits are going remote. Well, we took a different approach. We said, we're not going to do that. We're going to set up shop in a parking lot across the street. And so we remained doing services and programmatic stuff, cookouts, feeding. We had semi-trailers coming into the community, dropping off food. So we just figured out how to be different. And so at this time, 2021 comes, we probably had about 30,000, 40,000 in the bank from family and friends and donations. And, I'm working long hours and we've got a lot of volunteers, no staff members. And then it just kind of hit me as, I believe I had a vision where, how do we employ people now from our community? And a lot of times in neglected communities, especially throughout Jacksonville, we just kind of want to turn our heads when it comes to employment. Like we don't want to give people chances that have felonies, that have backgrounds, or that are associated with certain communities in our city. And the light bulb went off as I said, you know what, we got to try to fix that. We got to try to, bring a solution to that. And so 2021 came and I was driving home from work one day and I saw an old school bus sitting on a auto lot. And it was just immediate that I'm going to buy that bus and I'm going to turn it into something. I didn't know what it was, what I was going to do. And so 2 days later goes by. I got the approval by the board. I said, hey, I have a vision. I don't know what we're going to do with this, but can I buy this bus for $5,000? And so I show up at my front doorstep and my wife comes outside with my kids and there I had a 30-foot school bus sitting in my front yard. And so I knew that there was something there, but didn't know what. And a week goes by and I got a phone call from a buddy who owned a coffee shop. And he said, hey man, I heard you just bought a bus. He's like, you ever thought about turning it into a coffee shop? And I was like, no, I don't like coffee. I don't know what that would do. And he was like, well, come by my store. I want to show you some profit and loss statements. And I bet I'll get you to turn your mind to turning that thing into a coffee bus. And so, I went by there and he showed me all of his records and I was like, holy cow, you're making that much money off coffee? And he's like, yeah, man. He said, you should turn that into a coffee bus. So long story short, now I'm a big believer. Anytime we do a program in our community, I want to make sure the community stands behind it. And so we did a community survey and everyone in the community loved it. And I was like, oh my gosh, our community actually likes coffee. And so long story short, we put out a post and we raised $15,000 in about 5 days. And I turned that old bus into a full espresso, coffee machine. And next thing you know, it's on the road and we got a coffee bus.
Man, yeah. To hear you say you don't like coffee is interesting. I love coffee. You know that. We've had coffee and mine was like a gallon. I was like, what's the biggest size you have, man? I'm gonna guzzle this. So we have a bus. Now we have a store. We're gonna get there. But we started with a bus. We have a traveling coffee store. So how did we go from that to the place, we have our own cafe on University, and I think we're in total 6 locations. Obviously, correct me if I'm wrong. So, but we started this coffee bus situation not that long ago, for all intents and purposes, and now we're in what could be 6 locations. You might be correcting me here in a second. How did that journey take off?
Yeah, so I think the nonprofit just started to grow. We started to see a lot of programmatic needs from emergency assistance. Like now we cover every emergency assistant need in the community. We cover that financially. We do housing assistance. We do funeral costs. We do high school diploma classes. We do impact days. So we went from 2 programs to now 8 programs. And so there was a huge cost associated with sustainability. So over the last couple of years, what I did notice in the nonprofit world was, probably 70% of nonprofits in Jacksonville were being funded by grants. And so in the grant world, I didn't want to do that because I was not educated, for one. I didn't want to go around all the red tape. And we just didn't have the right person to manage it because it takes a full-time person to manage those grants, make sure you're in line. And so I wanted to know, how can we become self-sustaining? How can we create a mission outside of the nonprofit that brings in revenue, that makes impact? And how can we continue to grow that with something that people love in the city? Well, there's coffee. And so we bought the bus. The bus is traveling around. We're getting bookings all the time. It's on the road 5 to 6 days a week. It's generating income. First year it did 60 grand. Year 2 it doubled at 120. We're hiring kids from the community to drive or ride the bus with us to events. It was phenomenal. And so then in 2022, 2023, the Lord gave me a vision in Arlington and came over here to see my friend, which is our neighbor, Pastor Cheryl with the carpenter shop. And I stood out on her deck and I looked over and there was this strip mall. And I believe the Lord just said, hey, you're going to have that strip mall. And so one day I called the landlord and said, hey, this is who I am. This is what we've done. And he was like, I'd love to work with you. And so long story short, we drafted up a lease and, we gave a vision night. I invited probably about 30 people over to say, hey, can you help me build this out? And then just out of the random, act of kindness, there was a construction owner named Alan Fickling. And he said, hey, man, that story tugs so much on my heart. He's like, I want to build this for you. And he ended up building the shop with a bunch of contractors for like $370,000 all out of his pocket. And cool. We launched the shop end of 2022, 2023. And next thing you know, we have the bus. Now we have a store. And then from there, it just started growing with it, getting visions of areas around Jacksonville where we can be unique. We can place ourselves into different positions. So, we have 6 locations right now, 1 mobile, the rest brick and mortars. And then we started getting into some, smaller areas, and it's just been a really good fit for us.
How do you say thank you to somebody like that after them, 400 grand out of pocket just to further your cause?
Man, I have no idea. From a man came to Jacksonville with $5 in his pocket to see those kind of things. Like there's only something happening, which I know what it is.
Man, I mean, you said those numbers and my eyes got humongous. That's incredible. I've been there. It's great, by the way. What you guys done inside. It's nice. It's peaceful. Out of curiosity, though, I did see like there was like a back door, and there were a lot of kids, middle school, high school kids. I don't know if they were studying or if they were a part of some kind of a venture group or whatever the case may be. But do you host events there for kids? Like, can you walk me through that little area?
Yeah, so we have 3 units. We rent out the N1 currently right now to a bakery. And then the next unit next to that is our overflow, which we do host groups, council meetings, boards. We have a great partnership with Jacksonville University. We have groups come down from them probably once or twice a week, staff and coaches meetings in there. So it's really an overflow. And then we have our main store. And then, just recently we have launched a church out of the coffee shop with the Saints Church. And so they have their church here Sunday.
That's very cool. So for the coffee, we got the mobile unit, we've got the brick and mortars. That is Grounds of Grace fall under the Sponsored by Grace umbrella, or is this a for-profit entity?
Yeah, so basically the way it works is I started it as an LLC, being young and not having any idea of like how that would go. So got very excited as a young business owner. And so I started it underneath my name. And then first year of taxes came and I said, oh no, we can't do this no more. And I had a big tax bill. And so went back to the board and some lawyers locally. And I said, hey, how do I get out of this? And they said, well, Sponsored by Grace needs to buy Grounds of Grace and you need to come off of it. And it needs to sit underneath Sponsored by Grace. So we drafted up with attorneys and all that. And so, yes, Sponsored by Grace has absorbed Grounds of Grace. And now it is a funding mechanism to Sponsored by Grace. What do I mean by that? Every month when we pay our bills and pay our employees, whatever we have left over goes directly back into Sponsored by Grace.
Yeah. And then also on the Sponsored by Grace front, at least what I've seen on LinkedIn, you've taken a lot of selfies with this big board with all these like numbers on it. What is that? I know that it's obviously dollar amounts, but what are the donations for? What are they going to?
Yeah, so that's been an incredible journey. For the last 2 years, we're a multi-million-dollar organization now from a nonprofit standpoint, which is incredible because we don't have grants. We have community support from foundations, but we've never received really a grant from city, federal, state funding. It's all came from family, friends, and local businesses. And so when I have a lot of nonprofits come to me and say, hey, how the heck are you doing what you're doing? I believe there's a model where we don't have to rely on the city money. We can go out because there's people that want to support these kind of causes. But we actually just hit a record recently with that board that you're talking about. We just raised $106,000 in 26 days. And so there's ways around it. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it goes back to, if you're willing to work hard and put in the effort, I think there's some outcomes there.
Yeah, I'm with you on the grant thing, by the way, too. And the reason I'm with you on you going the self-sustainable route is because as we know, depending on political parties who get in office and whatnot, the money and the budgets can go many different ways. And so if you rely on the grants, you might get one year and it might not even be accessible to you the next year. And then what do you do at that point? So going through self-sustainability, personally, I think was the right move. I'm glad you did it, and clearly it's working out. On terms of, everything's in Jacksonville. You did the brick and mortars in Jacksonville, the buses in Jacksonville, the partnerships for the coffee, where you get your coffee, to the construction company who built out the building, and every other step and layer that comes in relation to the nonprofit and to the coffee company. I mean, how important is it that all of these partnership opportunities come from this city, or is it important at all?
Yeah, I think it's very important. Partnerships are key. And so, look, I've been in this a long time now, over a decade, and there are partnerships that come that are absolutely successful. And then there are partnerships that come because we get so excited about the work we're doing, and then they ended up, not being the right partnerships after 6 months. I think that's just the play of the game. But when you find solid partnerships that are consistent, that are transparent, that are honest, that goes a long way. And so, for example, with our coffee, we got to know where our bean comes from. My roaster, Jose, I know exactly where my bean comes from. I know how it's packaged. I know how it's shipped here. Excuse me. And so knowing those things, that's huge for us. So we're able to tell a story.
Yeah, I'm actually familiar with Jose. That's an amazing human being. So I'm glad that you and him are working together. Also, Jose is a Jacksonville guy.
He is.
So I wanted to kind of revisit the question itself. The partnerships absolutely are important, no doubt. And it seems like they're flourishing for you and you're finding the right ones along the way. But is it important that they're local? I mean, is it really important that you have the Jacksonville city name attached to some of these partnerships and some of the work you're doing? Or are you open to hearing from people outside of the state who are willing to, partake in what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fit. I'm all for local. I believe that we have more local businesses closing down than we do actually opening in the city. And there's a reason for that. I believe one of the biggest reasons is because we're not supporting local, because a lot of the bigger chains are coming in and taking effect in Jacksonville. I think that's a problem. And so how do we get back on this solid ground where we know that we are supporting our brothers and sisters in the local business and the local economy? Is we got to know what everybody's doing. So for example, for the choices that we make, whether it's shipping, whether it's local consumables, whether everything that we sell goes out the door, can I look back at all of our product and say, hey, everything that we are purchasing and selling is coming from a local level? And we're doing that 100% right now. We have been approached and continue to be approached by a lot of big dogs that are not in Jacksonville, and I just won't take their business. And it has nothing really to do with like who I like and who I don't like. I just have a choice that I would rather support local than somebody in California or somebody in Washington or wherever that's trying to get my business, because honestly, I don't like jumping on a phone call and I can't get a hold of somebody. I rather just text my, direct contact, Jose or whoever it is, or my cup guy or my napkin guy, and say, hey, we're short 2 of these. Can you run them by? And that's what I love, is like having small local businesses where you have that connection. And the biggest thing for me is relationship. Like, let's put business aside for a minute. I love that when I can go to lunch or dinner, or my family knows your family, and we just start to build something organically rather than it feels like it has to be forced for a business decision.
Yes. I love that. I love that. That's one of the main reasons why PB and Jax even exists, man, is just trying to get people connected with each other, that otherwise might not have had the opportunity to even know who the other person is. I love that answer. I do have a question about Jacksonville and coffee, though. We've seen like a rise in the coffee industry here in Jacksonville. We've got a lot of brands that are just expanding, and it is saturating quickly. There, everywhere I go in Jacksonville, man, there's 4 cafes, right? Like, you get your pick of the litter. I just want to get your general thoughts on the coffee scene in Jacksonville, especially from somebody who doesn't even like coffee. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on, 1, why it's happening, and 2, why all these different companies, these franchises thought, hey, Jacksonville's a really good market to expand our coffee footprint.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I'm a business owner from outside of Jacksonville, I'm coming to Jacksonville because it's a hot spot. It's continuing to grow. It's just the demographics. I mean, it's exploding. And every year we're seeing an increase of people. I mean, it makes sense, but you can't just open up a coffee shop to open up a coffee shop. That's my stance. Is there are maybe 2, maybe 3 coffee shops out of 100 in Jacksonville that are tied to a local cause. And so I'm always going to take a stance on that. Like, we know that every cup we sell is impacting one person's life in a community that is in our own backyard. So that story we will die on. Trust me, I don't get it. I drive by Beach Boulevard all the time by my house, and you got 7 brew and scooters, and they're literally, you can look out each other's window, and it's like, guys, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing I can stand on is I'm not just in it for another business transaction. I'm in it to change a life. And so I know that we're always going to stand off of that, but it's crazy because I've just been approached by 2 owners over the last couple months that are selling theirs because they just can't keep up, and they're multi-locations, and they're just like, it's getting exhausting trying to compete. And what's going to happen is these other brands, bigger brands, that are going to come into Jacksonville, they're going to squash these mom and pop places. And next thing you know, we're falling right back into the category of our small businesses are closing because of the bigger chains.
I absolutely see that. I can see that being a thing. A couple of these well-known coffee shops aren't from Jacksonville. They're from like Orlando that have made their way up here, and then they've opened up 10 locations. And it sure seems like that could be where we're headed. I hope that's not the case, but it's hard not to think that that's on the table.
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to sponsored by Grace, Grounds of Grace, or any of the other subsidies related to the nonprofit, I'm curious what your proudest moment is of the work you've done so far.
I think the proudest moment that I could stand behind that no one else that I have met in the decade that I've been doing this now is how consistent we have been. We have been in a community coming up on 8 years. We have missed 3 days in those years just by hurricane. Nothing else has shut us down. We've always been there. When there's a fire that breaks out and multi-units are burned down, or there's a shooting and someone's life has been taken, or DCF has to take a child out of the community, we have always been there. And I think for me and my team and our, and everything that we are doing, the biggest thing that I could say is like, consistency is the key to victory in these communities. And our team has been consistent.
That's wonderful. What about something that you have your future mind set for? Like, maybe you're not currently doing or doing as well as you'd like, but future state, you're working towards as a means of improvement for the work.
Yeah, it goes, there's a financial component to this. Is we've been asked, we are asked mostly every month, hey, can you come into another community? Hey, can you expand here? Hey, can you do a playbook here? I got a meeting this week with a very large church that says, hey, we want to adopt this community. And those are great. It just takes financial resources. We're running off of, our program is probably about 600 something $1,000 to run everything that we do in the community and outside. And it just takes those kind of resources. We want to replicate. We believe that there are about 15 other apartment complexes throughout Duval County that need these type of services, that need this type of work, that can really reduce crime, that can help reduce our child removal rates, that can help high school diplomas. Like, we believe we have something that's very special, but at the same time, it takes financial capital to do it.
Is there like a means of outside of the financial capital? Because of course that's going to be a part of it, but is there like a strategic alliance that can be formed by maybe another community advocate or another entity that's doing the work? Is there a pathway to that where you're just kind of growing by association?
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of that. One of the best things that I've seen our team do is we hire from directly in of the community. What do I mean by that? We have advocates that are on staff. So we have about 7 people who live on site that are residents of the community that are on our payroll, that hold the pulse of the community. They're running the programs. They're telling us the ins and outs. And so I think that's a phenomenal model for other communities, as we can empower people to run their own communities. It's just a lot of times they don't know where to start, what resources to hold, and how to really get their feet underneath them. And maybe it's just us coming in to empower them over this model that takes a year or two, and then kind of handing them the playbook. One thing that we've seen over the last 7 years is there's a community work going on across Jacksonville, but there's also a lot of silos. So we've got a lot of nonprofits, we've got a lot of community and social work happening, but not in the community. A lot of that is happening outside, and then we're delivering from within.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to think on this, and at the end, I'm going to ask how we can best support you. But, maybe there's introductions to be made where you guys can, there's a lot of nonprofit. The reason I'm doing this nonprofit series is because there's so many nonprofits doing great work that I think getting everybody in cahoots with each other can expand the footprint of the work they're doing and maybe become a little bit more impactful. So I'll think on that, and I'll bring it to you.
I would also say the other part about it is, like, this past week, I heard somebody saying, hey, I just helped, a person start, or help 3 people start their nonprofits in Jacksonville. And it's like, that's great. But like, before we start nonprofits, let's find out what people are doing. And maybe your part is just engaging with the nonprofit.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, this is a conversation for another day, but yes, if you have 10 nonprofits doing the same thing, maybe kind of like bring it together and make a bigger impact. It's just my thought, but it is what it is. As for the Grounds of Grace entity and the Sponsored by Grace nonprofit, the entire umbrella, what have I missed? Is there anything that I haven't touched on here that people should know?
No, I mean, we're just, that's who we are. We don't shift from what we're doing. We stay very consistent in what we do. We are not chasing growth. We have allowed it to come to us organically. And so we're very proud of what we've done. So yeah, we're staying on the tracks and, see what's up.
Yeah. Speaking of what's next, we got a fun thing going on here, man. And I'm gonna give you the reins. I'm gonna tee it up for you. But you've been in charge of this nonprofit space, this the Sponsored by Grace or Grounds of Grace, the brick and mortars, the bus, the growth, the community, all of it. That's been Ronald Armstrong's like thing. That's been your vertical. And now we're about to, try to take the work we've done in the communities and our passion for making Jacksonville a better place by going into a different route. I'll just leave it there. I want you to kind of tell people what's on your mind, what's going on, and what the plans are for the future.
Yeah. So, we'll go back to the story. $5 to my name, coming to Jacksonville, having nothing. This doesn't make sense to probably a lot of people that will hear this story, but it might to a lot of people as well. About 6 months ago, I was mowing my grass, and we've we've gotten to a great place with our nonprofit. The team we have, my operations team, the Grounds of Grace is self-sustaining. And I just believe we have something that's very special to the city. People have flocked to that. And so I was just mowing my grass about 6 months ago, and I heard the word mayor come over my mind. And it's exactly how Sponsored by Grace started. I was sitting on that couch and I heard, Ronald, and look over and there he is. And so, it took a couple of days to start journaling and what this might look like. But for the past 4 years, which I didn't share, as I've been writing and building a huge relationship with the homicide unit here in Jacksonville with Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. And the scenes that I have seen over the 4 years have been just the most gruesome, heartbreaking things that I've ever witnessed. And so, long story short, I said, okay, I'm going to give a shot at this. And so we have been working behind the scenes for the last about 3 months. And I have put my hat in to run for the mayor of Jacksonville for 2027. And I didn't know why, but I knew that, why not? I've seen where I've come from. I've seen what we've built. And in that, it was, okay, well, that sounds great, Ron. What are you even going to talk about for running for the mayor of Jacksonville? Building bigger bridges, infrastructure, downtown revitalization. And it wasn't those things. It was going in a complete opposite direction and talking about how we need to prioritize mental health in the city of Jacksonville, how we need to strengthen the family unit, and how we need to continue to revitalize communities. And so when he started to break those things down, talking about the suicide crisis, the overdose crisis, the resources and education behind mental health, I knew these are just not typical things you're going to hear on the political road. And then, strengthening the family unit when it talks about we need to decrease the number of child removal rate in Duval County. Like we're number, I think, 6 right now throughout the nation. That's a problem. Bring in the fathers home, teaching our fathers how to lead their families. Right now it's about 46% of homes are being led by single mothers. That's a problem in Jacksonville. And then creating an initiative where we just slow down on Sundays, like creating a citywide rest day, something you will not hear about on the political road, but I feel like we can't even remember what we did last week. And time is going by so fast. The world is spinning out of control. We're being inundated with technology. Why can't we just have a rest day? And then the last one was revitalizing communities, of taking the playbook of Sponsored by Grace and Grounds of Grace, replicating that into communities of Jacksonville. And we know we've seen success, so why can't we do this again? And then empowering the local church. Right now we have about 2,600 churches throughout Jacksonville. And if you think about it, if each church only took about 5 blocks from their centralized location, 82% of Jacksonville would be locally served by the local church. We wouldn't need all of these different programs. And so, there's just some really cool initiatives that have been put on my heart to go after. And so, yeah, we're gearing up for it.
Well, first and foremost, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's huge news. And obviously, just like Sponsored by Grace and the work you were doing with the donations to Brazil and whatnot, all of this was, you felt that it was called upon you by the Lord. I know from talking to you that this was no different. You felt that this was a calling and not just a decision. Congratulations on making that step and for following your heart, man. That's great. The data is impressive. How did we come to the church in the 5 blocks and the 82%? Because that is probably the most fascinating percentile of data I've heard in a long time.
I mean, honestly, it's simple. Is if I think it's 16 districts, how Jacksonville is split up in all these small little towns. And, you've got your West Side, you got your Mayport, you've got your Avondale. And so you look at how many churches are in those areas, and it almost feels like, just like coffee shops, we're building churches on every corners too. But if a local church it took 5 blocks of the local church, I mean, you're then expanding into other local churches' backyards. It's kind of like this, you're replicating a model that just is untouchable if we did it the right way. Now, this is very hard. It's going to be difficult. There's a lot of competitiveness when it comes to the local church. There's a lot of religion. There's a lot of things that you probably won't want to step in. But right now, we have about 12 churches that have committed to show up and to hear more and say, hey, you know what? It makes sense for us. The crazy part about this is the local church, some pastors I've already met with said, man, we don't even know our neighbors. That's a problem.
That is a problem.
You cannot just continue to say we are for the community and you can't walk across the street and know Miss Deborah lives there.
Yeah. I mean, the reason churches exist, it's not the reason. That's such an oversight on my part, but such a big reason why churches are like rooted in where they are is the sense of community. The same people show up to church every Sunday. You shake the same hands. Obviously, you get new people from time to time, but like 90% of the people that show up to that church are people from your community. So
That's right.
you should know who they are. Okay. No, I think the church part's great. I love it all so far, man. I'm curious about two things. Number one, any thought on like if this is if you've chosen a political party to run with, are you running independently?
Yeah, so I am a Republican. And so the way that this will work is basically there's two things. So the first one is you have to raise a certain dollar amount even before you even get placed on the ballot. So we are about 17 months away from election. I felt like I needed to be on the road for about 16 months. So over the next 3 months, we have a team of people that have been working throughout the background, from social media, storytelling, strategists, printing. I mean, all the things that we need to run this campaign. And so all of that takes dollars. And so we're going to try our best to do one big fundraiser in the next couple of months, and to raise anywhere from $100 to $1,000 to help us get a jump start on the road. If we hit that number, we will announce to the city June 2nd, and we will hit the road running. If we don't hit that number, I have told my team I am not dragging them through the mud. I'm not the type of guy that says, hey, keep believing in me for 2 more months and we don't have a penny in our account. I'm just not going to do that to them, because everybody has to eat. And so if we don't hit that number, we will actually pull our name out of the hat and not run, because I don't think it's fair to everyone else. And I don't think I'm the right person to do it by myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. What's the plan? What's the fundraising plan between now and June?
Yeah, so we're going to go soft launch here in the next week, all throughout social media. And that gives me full permission from my team to start just going haywire with the messaging that I believe we've been asked to tell. And so we will lead all the way up to the fundraiser, which will be in the very beginning of May. My goal is to invite anywhere from 200 to 300 people to this fundraiser, raise $100,000. That gives us a great cushion for the start of the campaign run. And then all through the campaign, it comes out to about a little over $1 million campaign, and that'll take us to the 2027.
Okay. And then let's say our vision is complete and we're elected. What's day one look like when you walk into office? What's the first thing you're hoping to do, once you step in for the first time?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. The first thing that I really want to make sure that, the office and the team is held to is accountability. There has been so much over the last 10 years that I've heard. Perfect example. We've got a lot of money floating around in the city. We don't want to start throwing grenades to start detonating things that don't need to be touched. Like, I believe we're doing really good in some areas in the city of Jacksonville. I think we're making really great progress. There's a lot of great deals happening. There's a lot of development happening. But we need to keep focused on the things that we don't want to talk about, the places we don't want to go. And unfortunately, they're not Ponte Vedra. Like, I think Ponte Vedra is doing a great job. There might be some little areas over there. We need to visit the smaller ones like the Mayports or, the North Side, or some of these areas that have just been voiceless for a long time. And we need to make sure the people are heard.
Is it fair to say that Jacksonville's never going to reach its full potential until we raise up these underserved areas?
I do believe that's part of it. There's still a lot of talk of like, you can put a bow on Jacksonville as long as you want to. I mean, let's be honest. We don't even look back anymore on the past mayors. We don't talk about what they've done right, what they've done wrong. We're always focused on the now. And to be honest with you, Donna Deegan, I think she's a great person. And I think she's got a lot of great things that she's worked on and, she's got her hand in. But, as a 36-year-old, man that has came to Jacksonville with $5 in his name and has built something and seen how the Lord has worked, I just believe it's the time of a shift. And that shift is going to take a lot of hard work of getting in the trenches and doing a lot of hard things. And I'm just raising my hand and saying, hey, I'm that guy and I'm willing to do it.
We believe in you, man. I mean, look at what you've done already. From $5 to a thriving nonprofit.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, man. I'm excited for you, and I know a lot of people who we're mutually connected to very excited for you as well. In the spirit of voting, Ronald Armstrong, Odd Con, who has the best mustache in Jacksonville?
I mean, me.
You.
Come on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then you already got my vote.
Come on.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm so pumped for what you've done and what you're doing. I want to make sure that we get the word out. How can people support you right now? How can people reach you?
Yeah, great question. So one of our objectives is we've got to have 7,600 petitions before the election. No one's done that. Everyone's paid the bill of $13,000 to bypass that. I want to be the guy who walks in the office and says, hey, here's your 76 or here's your 8,000 petitions. We've got them. That's one way. We have petitions on hand. We got tons of them here at the coffee shop at the university location. You can reach out to me. I can drop by. A lot of businesses have reached out already, said, hey, man, I need 50. I need 70. I'll drop them off to you. That's one way to get involved. The other way is follow the journey, www.theronarmstrong.com. You can go on there, subscribe to our newsletter as our site's being built out. You can donate. You can host a meeting. We're at the very beginning stages of this. And so, and the biggest thing I always tell people, you never know who you can introduce someone to. So next thing you know, if you know Tom and Tom is really, behind the political agenda, hey, I'd love to meet Tom because, Tom might be that next guy that strokes $100,000 and says, hey, I believe in your mission and your initiatives. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, and we have clear evidence of that when it, from the baptism event, turning over and leading to the nonprofit. You didn't know that guy the day before. So
you got 100 grand?
So theronarmstrong.com, obviously you're on LinkedIn. Is there any other social channels that people should be paying attention to?
Yeah, you can follow the Instagram. It's Ron Armstrong 2027. We just started that a couple weeks ago. Obviously, Facebook. I'm a big visual guy. I love to tell stories. I love to be going live. So my Facebook, Ron Armstrong. I love to just be an active person. So, take mayor away. We don't win. We don't even get to the ballot, or even if we don't even raise the money that we need and we don't get in this, I believe that there's something bigger that's brewing. We've just acquired a website called Jackstrong. So we're going to try to build out an initiative either way. So that's what's really exciting.
Yeah, man. This goes without saying, but whatever I can do to help, you say Thanks. The word. Is there anything we're missing? Obviously, I'll put all the details in the show notes of where people can go, but is there anything we haven't touched on?
No, man, this is super. I'm blessed to be on here. These are super helpful. Hopefully the audience, it's super helpful for somebody, and just know that whatever I can do to help somebody, just let me know as well.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for everything you've done for Jacksonville. And I also want to thank you for everything you're about to do for Jacksonville. We do these because we want to highlight people that are doing great work in the city. And it goes without saying, you, sir, are doing great work in the city. So from me and from everybody, we appreciate you.
Thanks, Randall.
Yes, sir. All right, man. Have a blessed one.
See you, bud.